Alright, so this is the one that changes the whole conversation. Because up till now, we've been talking about timeline shifts and Mandela effects like they've happened to us. Like we're the passengers and reality is the vehicle. And somewhere along the road, it swerved, or branched, or merged. And now we're sitting here trying to explain why things don't match. But once you've gone far enough down this rabbit hole, you start realizing there's a question you can't avoid forever, even if you try to keep things grounded. And the question is simple, but it's heavy. What if we're not just witnessing a random glitch, or a natural drift, or some weird side effect of reality being more flexible than we were taught? What if we're being moved on purpose? Not in a dramatic movie way, not in a someone's watching you from the shadows way, but in the sense that outcomes might be guided and branches might be managed, and the experience of reality might not be as hands-off as we assume it is. When you look at the Mandela Effect properly, the weirdest part isn't even that something changed. It's how the change sits inside the world so cleanly, like it's always been the way, while at the same time a massive number of people carry the memory of a different version with complete confidence. That doesn't feel like chaos to me. That feels like an edit. And once you allow the idea of an edit, you naturally start wondering who or what is capable of making it. Now, before we go too far, I want to slow this down and make it practical, because I don't want this to turn into one of those conversations where we start inventing villains just to keep the mystery exciting. When I say on purpose, I'm not necessarily saying there's a person behind it in the way we think of a person. I'm not saying there's a committee somewhere making decisions. I'm not even saying that there has to be intention in the way humans understand intention. What I mean is that if reality behaves like a system, and that system can branch or merge or correct itself, then it might also be able to steer itself. It might run rules, it might run checks, it might optimize outcomes, and it might avoid collapse points. It might nudge probability, and it might do that quietly without making a loud event out of it. So on purpose could simply mean that the shift wasn't random. It could mean that it was part of how the system stays stable, or how it keeps moving forward, or how it chooses between competing outcomes. And if that's even slightly true, then Mandela effects stop being random trivia, and they become something more like fingerprints. They become little marks left behind by movement. Let me tell you the first thing that makes this feel less accidental. Most Mandela effects, when you really look at them, aren't world-ending changes. They're not the kind of edits that rewrite your entire day-to-day life. They don't erase major events in a way that would collapse the timeline in front of everyone. They tend to sit in areas that feel strangely contained. Logos, quotes, spellings, small visual details, cultural memories, things that exist everywhere but don't usually determine whether your life continues tomorrow. Now, if you believe the Mandela effect is just memory mistakes, then sure, that makes sense because memory mistakes would naturally cluster around pop culture and brands. But if you believe something real is shifting, then this containment becomes interesting because it suggests that whatever is changing is doing it in a way that doesn't break the overall structure. It's like the world has been updated in places where the update won't cause an immediate collapse. Like you can swap out textures and minor assets while leaving the main framework intact. And I'm not saying that to force a simulation metaphor. I'm saying it because the pattern looks like reality can change without tearing itself apart, and that alone suggests rules. And if there are rules, then the next thought is unavoidable. Rules don't just appear. Systems have rules for a reason. They keep things stable. Before we go any further, I want to invite you to look at the first 2 parts of this series. It's a 7-part deep dive into what the Mandela Effect potentially is. They'll be linked in the comments. The next thing that makes this feel less random is something we covered in part 2, but it matters even more here. Some people remember these changes instantly, clearly, and emotionally. Other people don't remember them at all. And that's not a small difference. It's a wall. If this was random noise, you would expect the effects to be messy and evenly scattered, with everyone having a similar level of uncertainty about them. But that's not what happens. What happens is some people carry old continuity with confidence, and others seem to live fully inside the new continuity, like the old one never existed. And when you see that split, it starts to feel like there are different experiences happening at once. Almost like reality updates don't land in the same way for everyone, or at the same time, or with the same effect. Now, I know that it could fit a natural explanation, like memory anchors and personality types and awareness levels. But if you take the shift seriously, it also fits a bigger possibility, which is that reality could be running a kind of built-in comparison. A control group of sorts, without calling it that. People who don't notice and people who do. And I'm not saying that to make you feel special. I'm saying it because if we're testing whether the system is stable after changes, you'd want to know how many people detect the seams. You'd want to know if the edits were invisible or if they're starting to leak through. Which brings us to the next pattern that keeps showing up. One of the most common things I hear from people who are deep into this isn't even, I remember a different quote. It's happening more. And that's not a small statement, because it changes the story. It suggests an ongoing process rather than a one-time event. Now, yes, there's always the argument that once you notice something, you start noticing it more, and that's true in life generally. But the way people describe this goes beyond that. They describe it like the world is speeding up, like the atmosphere is shifting, like reality is becoming less stable, and like the changes are stacking. And if you combine that with how often people talk about the same shift windows and how often people describe the same feeling of life hasn't felt the same since, it starts to sound like an increase in pressure rather than an increase in curiosity. And pressure tends to mean one of two things. Either something is breaking or something is being pushed. That's why the question, are we being moved on purpose, becomes so important, because if changes are accelerating, then whatever is driving them might be ramping up, not fading out. By the way, if you're watching this and getting the quiet feeling of, this explains too much, do me a favor and hit like, because it helps more people find the series without getting buried. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe now, because we're not done with this, and the next episode is going to connect a few dots that I think a lot of people have been feeling for years. Alright, let's keep going. So let's take the idea seriously for a minute. If reality is being managed, what would that even mean in practice? It doesn't have to mean something is rewriting history like a book. It could simply mean that the outcomes are being steered through probability. That certain events are more likely to happen in one branch than another. And the system favors the branch that stays stable, or the branch that reaches a particular outcome. And if that's the case, then moving people wouldn't necessarily look like teleportation or dramatic moments. It could look like subtle continuity drift. Like you wake up and your life is still your life, your family is still your family, your world still looks like the world. But the tiny details don't match what you remember. That's exactly how Mandela effects feel. They feel like the world didn't explode, it just adjusted. And if that adjustment is happening for a reason, then the question becomes, why would a system adjust reality at all? Because no system changes without a goal. So let's talk about the most likely goals. And I want you to listen to these and notice which one feels the most true to the world you've been living in. The first motive could be stability. If a timeline is heading toward a collapse point, not in a cinematic end-of-the-world way, but in a structural way where the outcomes become unstable, then a system that could branch would naturally favor a neighboring branch that stays coherent. It would shift probability away from the collapse branch. And if that happened, the people inside it wouldn't necessarily notice the switch, except for the residual memories that don't line up clearly. The second motive could be optimization. This one is uncomfortable, but it's simple. What if reality is being pushed towards certain outcomes, certain discoveries, certain cultural shifts, certain technological milestones? Not because it cares about your comfort, but because the system prefers a particular path forward. And again, the Mandela effects wouldn't be the goal. They would be the side effect of steering. The third motive could be containment. This is the darker one. The idea that some outcomes are dangerous, either because they destabilize the system or because they lead to something that shouldn't have happened yet. So the system nudges away from them. It doesn't erase everything, it just slightly adjusts the branch to reduce the probability of those outcomes. And you're left with the small continuity scars that don't quite match. And the fourth motive, which I think is the creepiest, is testing. Because if the system is capable of change, it might also be capable of measuring awareness. It might be capable of noticing who notices. It might be capable of running small edits and seeing how many people detect them, how quickly, and what they do with that detection. And if that's happening, then Mandela effects are not random trivia. They're feedback loops. Now, I'm not telling you which one is true. I'm telling you those are the only reasons a system would make changes at all. Stability, optimization, containment, or testing. And if you feel the world's been guided over the last decade like it's being moved towards something, then you understand why this episode matters. Alright, I want to bring you guys into this because this series only works if we build it together. So here's the poll question for this episode, and I want you to answer it honestly based on what the world has felt like to you. If we are being moved, what's the most likely reason? Is it A, timeline stabilization to prevent collapse? Is it B, optimization or to push certain outcomes? C, containment to stop something dangerous? Or is it D, testing awareness and measuring who notices? And in the comments, I want you to tell me one thing as well. Not your favorite Mandela effect, but the first time you personally felt like reality had changed, even if you couldn't explain it. A year, a moment, a stretch of time where it stopped feeling the same. Because those stories are the real data. And if you're connecting with this series and enjoying watching it as much as I'm enjoying making it, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel because it helps keep this channel growing and it tells YouTube to show it to people who need to hear it. And the next episode is going to be one of the more personal ones we've done because we're going to talk about what happens when you notice too much and you can't switch off. Here's my last word on this. The Mandela Effect isn't scary because a quote is different. It's scary because it suggests that reality can shift without announcing itself, and most people would never know. And if it can shift once, it can shift again. And if it can shift again, then we're not living in the kind of reality we were taught that we were living in. I think the reason so many of us feel unsettled isn't because we're obsessed with logos. It's because deep down we can feel that something bigger is happening behind the scenes. And the Mandela Effect is just the moment where that bigger thing becomes visible. And if you've ever had that feeling that life is speeding up, that reality is becoming more artificial, that the world is being shaped rather than discovered, then you already understand why the idea of being moved on purpose doesn't sound impossible. It sounds like it fits the world we've been watching. Now, I'm not saying you should live in fear. I'm not saying you should obsess over every change. But I am saying that awareness matters. Because if reality is being managed, then the most important thing you can do is stay conscious of your own experience and trust your own continuity. And maybe, just maybe, the people who remember are the ones who still have access to something the system can't fully overwrite. A thread back to where they were. A record of the previous build. Proof that the shift happened. So if you've felt it, if you've noticed it, if you've had that moment where the world didn't match your memory and it shook you, then you're not alone. You're part of a much larger group than you think. And we're going to keep mapping this together. I'm Mike. Stick around and watch one of our other stories. And as always, make sure you stay curious and share what you know with those that are happy to listen. I'll see you in the next one.